All right, guys. Well, given the circumstances of the week, we might not have a big showing today. We might not have a lot of people show up today. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Um, Today's review is going to be a little different. We're going to go over what you guys need to do for the week, talk about some important topics or subtopics from your chapter, but we're not going to get into content review. And that's because everybody has their note-taking assignment this week. So I don't want you to just sort of take notes during this review or on this review and then turn those in as your chapter notes. Instead, I want to see how well everybody's internalizing their chapter readings and how well you guys are doing taking the information from the book and applying it to your notes, how you organize your notes, what you guys think are important topics from the book, and basically just how thoroughly you guys are taking notes. So I don't want this little lecture to influence the notes that you take on the chapter. That said, if anybody is having difficulty with the chapter content or understanding any of the topics or themes from the chapter, shoot me an email. I'm happy to set up some individual meetings. I've had several good individual meetings this week. So go ahead and shoot me an email and we can talk about content on a one-on-one basis. All right, so you guys all know that this week you have a little bit different weekly tasks. You have a big chapter assignment that's worth 50 points rather than having a chapter and a source assignment. I'm sorry, one second. So make sure that you guys are taking solid notes on your chapter, on chapter 4, and that you guys are preparing for a longer chapter assignment. Your chapter assignment is worth all 50 points this week. And that's because chapter 4 covers a lot of important content. Keep in mind that we sort of started our look at slavery last week. So keep that in mind. There are some important questions pertaining to slavery. Talked a little bit about the triangle trade last week. Make sure you review that and also read what the book says about the triangle trade. Also about slavery, look into the slave uprising of 1712. Look at slave resistance. Look at the formation of slave culture in different areas, how different regions impacted the amount of slaves that lived in a certain region, and how that in turn impacted the development of slave culture. You're going to see far more slaves in the South and rice plantations in the Caribbean and sugar plantations and sort of more or less slave usage in middle colonies like Virginia and Maryland, where they rely on fewer slaves for plantation tobacco farms. And then northern slavery is much more of a domestic slavery institution where individuals employ slaves working for your families. Also, slaves are used in ports and shipyards and so forth. So make sure you understand the different regions and how slavery impacted those regions. We talked about a society with slaves developing into a slave society where slavery is central to the economic process in a certain region. All right, some other important topics from chapter 4. Make sure you guys understand the concepts of republicanism and liberalism. This is kind of a difficult concept, but make sure you guys understand the basics of republicanism and liberalism. We're going to start looking at how authority in colonies is being challenged. The chapter starts to look at colonial assemblies and how they start to challenge the authority of colonial governors. Make sure you guys know who each of these authorities are representing. Colonial assemblies are really representing the colonists themselves, while colonial governors are often appointed by the crown. So again, keep in mind the different types of colonies that we're discussing here. Joint stock colonies, proprietary or royal colonies. Make sure you understand these sort of power dynamics between these colonial elites that are starting to gain power on a local level and begin to challenge the authority of the crown, who appoints members of authority to colonial governments. Talked about the triangle trade. Make sure you guys understand the Middle Passage. Basically, the whole first half of the chapter here is looking at slave culture, slave resistance, different dynamics of slavery in different areas of the country, slave resistance, et cetera, et cetera. Make sure you guys understand the Stono Rebellion. This is the largest slave rebellion in colonial history, the repercussions of the Stono Rebellion. Much like we talked about Bacon's Rebellion, the Stono Rebellion is much more important for its repercussions, or the tightening of slave codes and slave laws based on the Stono Rebellion. Different definitions of freedom or liberty. Liberty is a good synonym for freedom. The sort of liberal and Republican views of liberty and freedom. Keep in mind these concepts of republicanism and liberalism change several times throughout American history, and in very little do they reflect contemporary or modern conservatism or liberalism. Political cultures and the right to vote. Make sure you guys understand the concept of salutary neglect. This is a big one. This will lead to challenging the crown's authority over its North American colonies. It's basically this idea that the crown of England was preoccupied with issues in the motherland, issues in England, and so they really sort of neglect a lot of their colonies, leading to a rise in or a disruption of power dynamics where these colonial elites start to assume more and more power. This will really lead to the sentiments of rebellion, and will really lead to eventually organizing against the authority of the crown, which will eventually result in the American Revolution. Colonial press is very important in this process of challenging authority, and also how information is disseminated and impacts English colonists, and how they view their representation, how they view themselves as English subjects or identify as colonial Americans. Within that, make sure you guys understand the John Peter Zenger trial. That's very important. This concept of seditious libel, and this concept of challenging authority in a court system, and based on libel, or whether you're telling the truth. I won't get too far into that, but make sure you understand the John Peter Zenger trial. Look at the Enlightenment, how the European Enlightenment influenced the American Enlightenment, and then look into the religious response to the Enlightenment, which is the first so-called Great Awakening. George Whitefield, these evangelicals basically trying to combat the influence of the Enlightenment and scientific theory, and trying to sort of reassert the Protestant dominance in colonial America, or ubiquitous Protestantism in colonial America. Make sure you understand the impact of the Great Awakening and the Enlightenment. And then we get into the 7 Years' War. There's a big short answer question on the 7 Years' War. Make sure you understand the global implications of the 7 Years' War, and also the colonial implications, or the colonial arena of war, which is often referred to as the French and Indian War. This is one sort of arena of a larger global conflict that was the 7 Years' War. So make sure you understand the power dynamics between Spain and France and England. Make sure you understand the repercussions of the 7 Years' War, how territory was redistributed. Make sure you understand the importance of the Native Americans and this sort of conflict over a territory often referred to as the Old Northwest or west of Pennsylvania, and how this is all part of this larger process of expanding white English borders and encroaching on Native Americans. And now we start to have two European empires run up against each other in a disputed territory in what we often refer to as the Old Northwest, or what will eventually be subjected to the Northwest Ordinance. So make sure you understand all those important power dynamics between the three empires, and also Native Americans in the region. And make sure you understand the importance of the 7 Years' War when it comes to colonial identities, when it comes to this idea of colonial America as an extension of the English Empire, and how it really impacted these ideas of rebellion, these ideas of revolt, and also the logistical impacts of the 7 Years' War, which forced England to impose higher taxes and start looking into some more direct taxes on British colonies. All right, so make sure you guys touch on all of those important topics in your notes. I'll give you guys some tips for your notes. Your chapter is broken up and organized very easily into larger topics with subheadings and subtopics underneath those topics. Make sure you guys are touching on each of those subheadings or those subtitles in the chapter. So here's an example. The chapter starts out, Slavery, Freedom, and the Struggle for Empire. Gives a good introduction about slavery and empire, before getting into the first subheading, which is slavery and empire, and then the Atlantic slave trade. So for each of those, we want to see information on each of those little subsections in the chapter. I've also put up let me share my screen for you. I've also added to our Blackboard page a little section over here called Note-Taking Tips. Under that section is a link to a little Blackboard presentation on note-taking and what is called active learning. So check that out. It's got some interesting content in it. It's got some good ideas in it. It's got some tips on how to use different note-taking strategies. You guys don't have to use any of these particular formats for your note-taking assignment, but make sure you check it out. It'll help you. So yeah, check that out for your note-taking assignment. Keep in mind your notes are due by Friday at 5. And the more thoroughly you take notes on Chapter 4, the better prepared you'll be for a bigger chapter quiz worth 50 points. If you guys are in CRN 25842, keep in mind we got a new TA. His name is Manuel. He posted a message yesterday introducing himself, also with his office hours. He's going to be holding virtual Zoom office hours. So he's taking over for Austin for us. And if you are in 25842, after this note-taking assignment, anything that you will submit directly to your TAs will follow the same breakup that it did when you had Austin and Ian. Okay, so Austin or Ian, I believe you had M through Z. Is that correct?
I have A through M.
A through M. Okay, so that means that Manuel will have M through Z, or N through Z, I guess, right? Okay, cool. But for this week, since Manuel's new, if you're in 25842, everybody email your note-taking assignment directly to Ian. If you are In my other 1301, either 28968, 21497, or 28969, you'll email your notes directly to me. Keep in mind the instructions for what to write in your subject line of your notes. It's a stupid reason to lose points if you don't include your CRN or your name or the name of the assignment. All right, guys. I will open it up to questions now. I'm happy to answer any questions over the next few minutes you guys have. If not, I'll let you guys go and get back to reading the chapter. Or Ian, do you have any comments or questions for me or for the class?
No, other than just to put in the subject and CRN, because I'm gonna get a bunch of emails all in a row, and last semester some would get lost. It's hard to find them. So other than that.
Yeah, for sure. It's in your own best interest. That's why we told you to fill out that subject line, because we have a lot of students, so we don't want to lose your notes.
Excuse me. So for our notes, can we also like submit a picture info instead of a Word document, since I like to take notes by hand?
No, for this one, we need you to do a Word document or a Google Docs.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I know some people like to take notes by hand. I do too. It just, we have so many students, it gets tough to really look at each one and try to decipher what you're writing down and stuff. So for the rest of the semester, feel free to take notes by hand, but for this one, we need you to write a Google document or a Word document.
Okay, thank you, sir.
No problem. All right, guys, last chance. Anything else?
Oh, sorry. One more question. So I noticed that you were mentioning like the CRN like 25 something something, but mine is 21497.
Okay, yeah, there's several different 1301 classes on here. 21497 is one of my other classes, so you don't have to worry about any of that I said with the TA. You don't have a TA for your class yet, so you'll just send it directly to me.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. All right, guys. Well, last chance. All right. Well, hopefully everybody's staying warm and everybody has internet access and everything. If you guys have any problems with any of that, or you're dealing with weather issues or anything like that, shoot me an email. Be be open about it and shoot me an email and we'll talk about it and we'll figure something out. Okay. We're here to help. All right, guys. Well, have a great day. We'll see you guys next week.
You too, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.